Let me tell you something that took me years to understand, and I want you to hear it not just with your ears, but with everything inside you. The difference between the person who dies with wealth and the person who dies with regret is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not even opportunity, though people love to blame the absence of opportunity for the absence of results. No, the real difference, the one that separates the man who builds something magnificent from the man who merely talks about building something magnificent, is a discipline so simple that most people walk right past it. They overlook it because they are looking for something complex. They are looking for a secret formula, a special connection, a lucky break. But the answer has been sitting in plain sight for centuries, and here it is. Consistency, doing what needs to be done day after day, whether you feel like it or not, whether the weather cooperates or not, whether your mood cooperates or not, whether anyone is watching or not. Now, I have traveled this world and met people from every walk of life, from the man sleeping under a bridge to the man sleeping in a mansion overlooking the ocean. And I promise you, after all those conversations, after all those years of study and observation, the gap between those two men is not as wide as society would have you believe. The gap was created by small decisions, repeated consistently over time, compounded into either great fortune or great regret. That is the truth. And if you can absorb that truth, not just intellectually, but in your bones, it will change everything about how you approach your life from this moment forward. Let me start with something fundamental. People misunderstand what it means to be ordinary. They think ordinary is a permanent condition. They think it is a life sentence handed down by birth or circumstance. But ordinary simply means you have not yet applied an extraordinary process to your potential. Every millionaire you admire, and I mean every single one, began as an ordinary person standing in an ordinary place, looking at an extraordinary gap between where they were and where they wanted to be. The question was never whether they were born with gifts others lacked. The question was whether they were willing to do ordinary things with extraordinary regularity. That word, regularity, is the engine of all wealth creation. You cannot outthink the power of regularity. You cannot outspend it. You cannot replace it with inspiration alone, though inspiration is where it often begins. Think about the acorn. Now, I have used this example many times because it holds one of the most profound lessons in human experience. You plant an acorn in the ground. You water it on Monday. Nothing happens. You water it on Tuesday. Nothing happens. Wednesday comes and goes. Thursday, Friday, a week passes, and if someone walked by that spot in the earth, they would see nothing. They would conclude that the effort was wasted. They would say, I tried planting something and it did not work. But what is happening beneath the surface? Everything. The roots are reaching. The foundation is forming. The tree is becoming what it was always designed to become, but it is doing so invisibly, underground, away from the eyes of the impatient. Most people quit in that invisible phase. They quit right before the breakthrough because they cannot see any evidence that their consistent effort is producing any result. And that, my friend, is the single greatest tragedy in the story of human potential. Not failure, quitting. Wealth is built the same way that oak tree grows, mostly underground, mostly invisible, mostly doubted by everyone around you until one day it is undeniable. The millionaire did not become a millionaire on the day the money arrived in the account. He became a millionaire years earlier, in the discipline of his mornings, in the choices he made at the dinner table, in the books he opened when everyone else was watching television, in the calls he made when rejection was fresh and doubt was loud. The money was simply the confirmation of a process already completed internally. You become wealthy on the inside long before the world confirms it on the outside. Now, I want to talk to you about something that trips people up because understanding this mistake is the only way to avoid it. People confuse motivation with consistency, and they are not the same creature. Motivation is a guest in your house. It shows up, it is wonderful, it fills the room with energy and excitement, and then it leaves. And when it leaves, if you have built your habits on motivation alone, you leave with it. You stop, you pause, you wait for motivation to return before you resume working. And that waiting, that pause, and is where ordinary people stay ordinary. The wealthy do not wait for motivation. They have built a system that operates regardless of how they feel on a given morning. They have made the decision in advance, made it once permanently, so they do not have to make it again every day. Consistency is the automation of good judgment. You decide once that you will read every morning. You decide once that you will invest a portion of every dollar that enters your hand. You decide once that you will pursue your craft with deliberate attention every single day, and then you stop deciding and start executing. The decision has been made. Now the only question is execution. This is what separates the amateur from the professional. The amateur performs when inspired. The professional performs on schedule. And wealth, Real, lasting, generational wealth is a profession. It requires the professional's mindset. It requires you to show up even when the market is down, even when your energy is low, even when your friends think you are working too hard, even when the results are not yet visible. You show up because you understand something they have not yet learned, that the showing up is the result, the habit is the product, the consistency is the wealth, and everything else, the money, the freedom, the choices, is simply the evidence of that wealth expressed in physical form. Let me give you a picture. Imagine two men who both decide at the age of 25 that they want to build financial independence. The first man gets excited. He reads 3 books in the first month, attends 2 seminars, starts a savings plan, begins learning about investment. He is on fire. By the 3rd month, the excitement has cooled. By the 6th month, the savings plan has been interrupted. By the end of the first year, he has returned to his previous habits, and all that knowledge he gathered is sitting dormant in his mind like seeds that were never planted in soil. The second man gets equally excited in that first month. He reads, he attends, he starts the savings plan. But then he does something the first man did not do. He builds a structure around his excitement. He automates the savings so he never has to decide again. He schedules the reading so it is not optional. He creates accountability so the plan continues even when enthusiasm wanes, the months pass. The structure holds. At the end of year 1, he has not done anything spectacular. He has not made a dramatic investment. He has not had a lucky break. He has simply continued. At the end of year 5, the difference between these two men is becoming visible. At the end of year 10, it is dramatic. At the end of year 20, one man has built a life of choices and the other is still waiting for the right moment to begin again. That story is not fictional. That is the actual biography of millions of people. The script changes, the industry changes, the city changes, the specific numbers change, but the fundamental story is the same everywhere I have traveled, everywhere I have spoken, everywhere I have sat down with people who are struggling to understand why their life has not yet reflected their desires. The answer almost always comes back to the same place. Consistency was interrupted and never recovered. Now I want to spend some time on the subject of philosophy, because your philosophy about money determines everything about your relationship with money. If you believe wealth is a matter of luck, you will not build the habits that create wealth because habits feel unnecessary when you think luck is the deciding factor. If you believe wealth is reserved for a certain type of person, a smarter person, a more connected person, a person born into the right family, then you will never pursue the disciplines that produce wealth because you have already concluded that those disciplines would not work for someone like you. Your philosophy is your filter. Everything you perceive, every opportunity you notice or overlook, every decision you make or avoid, all of it flows through the filter of your philosophy first. And here is where I want to challenge you. Not gently challenge you, but really challenge you, because gentle challenges produce gentle changes and you deserve better than that. Your philosophy about consistency may be the single most important thing you examine today. Most people believe they are consistent. Ask anyone if they are a consistent person and they will tell you yes. But then ask them to show you their bank account for the last 3 years. Ask them to show you their reading log. Ask them to walk you through their daily schedule for the past 12 months. That is where philosophy meets reality, and that is where many people discover that what they believed about themselves and what they were actually doing are two very different things. There is no judgment in that discovery. There is only information. And information, when used honestly, is the beginning of transformation. So what does a philosophy of consistency actually look like in practical terms? It looks like this. Every day, without exception, you make small moves toward your target. Not monumental moves, not heroic gestures, small moves. You read 10 pages of something that will improve your financial intelligence. You make one phone call that moves a project forward. You invest a set percentage of your income, even when that percentage feels almost embarrassingly small. You review your goals and remind yourself why the work matters. You do these things not because each individual action produces a result, but because 10,000 repetitions of these actions, stacked end to end over years, produce a life that looks to the outside world like an overnight success. And you smile at that. You smile because you know the real story. You know about the mornings when it was hard to get up. You know about the months when nothing seemed to be working. You know about the conversations where people suggested you were working too hard for too little. And you know that you kept going anyway, not out of stubbornness, but out of understanding. Understanding is the word I want you to hold on to. The person who is consistent merely out of willpower will eventually exhaust that willpower. Willpower is a resource, and like all resources, it depletes under sustained pressure. But the person who is consistent out of understanding, who genuinely comprehends why the process works, who has connected the dots between the daily discipline and the long-term result, that person has a nearly inexhaustible source of fuel. Understanding produces conviction, and conviction does not run out. The millionaire who reads every morning does not read every morning morning because they force themselves to. They read every morning because they have seen, in their own life and the lives of others they study, the direct connection between continuous learning and expanding income. The reading is not a chore. It is an investment they believe in completely. That belief is what sustains the behavior through every season, through the seasons when life is cooperating, and through the seasons when life is testing everything you have. Now let us talk about the mathematics of consistency, because I want you to see this not just as a philosophy, but as a literal, provable, mathematical reality. If you improve by just 1% each day, one tiny, almost imperceptible increment of growth, at the end of a year you are not 100% better, you are 37 times better. That is the mathematics of compounding applied to personal development and to financial behavior. 37 times better. Now compare that to the person who improves sporadically, who makes great strides in January, then stops, then starts again in April, then loses momentum by summer. Their compounding is broken, the chain is interrupted, and a broken chain does not compound, it merely accumulates gaps. The wealth gap between the consistent and the inconsistent is not a gap of talent or advantage, it is a gap of compounding. One person allowed compounding to work without interruption. The other interrupted it repeatedly, which is really the same as never starting it properly in the first place. Think about money itself for a moment. The reason that investing a modest sum of money every month for 40 years produces a staggering result is not magic. It is compounding. It is the returns on the returns on the returns stacked decade upon decade without interruption. And the mathematical principle that governs financial compounding is identical to the principle that governs personal development. The knowledge you gain in year 1 earns you opportunities in year 2. The skills you refine in year 2 expand your capacity in year 3. The network you build in year 3 opens doors in year 5. And by year 10, you are operating in a world that looks entirely different from the world you started in. Not because the world changed, but because you changed consistently over a decade, and your changed self is now capable of perceiving and acting on things that your former self could not even see. That is the magic that is not magic. That is the miracle that is simply consistency applied with patience. And let me say something about patience, because this is another area where people are getting the wrong message. Patience does not mean passive. Patience is not sitting and waiting. Patience is active. Patience is doing the work every day while you wait for the compounding to become visible. The consistent person is the most active person in the room, not the most frantic. There is a difference between frantic and active, but the most deliberately, purposefully, continuously active. They are always in motion toward their objective, not sprinting. Sprinting is for short distances. For the distance between ordinary and extraordinary, you need endurance running. You need the pace you can maintain for years without destroying yourself, and that sustainable pace, maintained without deviation for long enough, covers more ground than any sprint ever could. Let me shift now and speak about something personal, because I think the personal dimension of this conversation is just as important as the philosophical and mathematical dimensions. I want to talk about what happens inside a person who chooses consistency in a world that is constantly tempting them away from it. Because you need to know this. You need to know what is coming so that when it arrives, you recognize it for what it is, and you do not mistake it for a sign that you should stop. When you commit to a path of consistent development, you will experience something I call the enrollment gap. The enrollment gap is the period, and it can last months or years, when you are enrolled in the process of becoming wealthy, but the evidence has not yet appeared to confirm your enrollment. During this period, you will feel invisible. You will work hard and feel like no one is noticing. You will make progress that you cannot yet measure in dollars. You will have conversations with people who look at you and see the same person they have always seen, not realizing that internally you are becoming someone entirely different. The enrollment gap is extraordinarily dangerous because it is when most people quit. They cannot endure being unconfirmed. They need external validation of the process, and when the external validation does not arrive on schedule, they conclude that the process is not working. But the process is always working. You simply cannot see underground. Here is what I want you to do during the enrollment gap. I want you to become a student of other people's timelines. Study the biographies of people who have built wealth. Real biographies, not the highlight reel version you see in interviews and press releases, but the actual decade-by-decade account of how they built what they built. What you will discover, in almost every case, is that the visible success arrived after an extended period of invisible progress. The breakthrough that the world celebrated had roots that went back 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years before anyone was paying attention. And in those quiet years, the person was doing what? They were being consistent. They were reading, learning, saving, building, refining, connecting, studying, failing, adjusting, and continuing. That is the unspectacular story behind every spectacular result. Knowing this changes how you endure your own enrollment gap. Instead of interpreting the absence of visible results as evidence of failure, you interpret it as evidence that you are in the underground phase. the phase the tree is always in before it becomes impossible to ignore. You use that interpretation to fuel continued action rather than a decision to quit. And that reinterpretation, that philosophical shift in how you read your own experience, is one of the most powerful tools available to any person who wants to build a life of genuine wealth and freedom. Now I want to address something that comes up every time I speak on this subject, and it comes up because it is a real obstacle for real people, not an imaginary one. People say, I understand the value of consistency, but I have tried to be consistent and I always fall off track. Life interrupts, things come up, I start strong and then something happens and I lose my rhythm, and by the time I try to get back on track, so much time has passed that I feel like I have to start all over again. Let me deal with that directly, because that experience is valid and the frustration behind it is real. First, falling off track is not the enemy of consistency. Staying off track is. The person who builds genuine lifelong consistency is not the person who never misses a day. They are the person who, when they miss a day, misses only one day. The recovery is everything. Your ability to recover quickly, to miss one day without it becoming 1 week, to experience one setback without it becoming 6 months of inactivity, is the skill that separates the people who eventually win from the people who eternally almost win. And recovery is a skill. It can be practiced. It can be strengthened. Every time you pull yourself back on track quickly after an interruption, you are developing the recovery muscle, and over years that muscle becomes enormously strong. Eventually, you become the kind of person who cannot stay off track for long, even if they wanted to, because the habits are too established, the identity is too clear, the understanding is too deep. Second, I want you to examine your definition of starting over. If you run 10 miles every week for a year and then miss 1 week, you have not lost the 10 miles a week you ran for 52 weeks. Your lungs are still stronger. Your discipline muscle is still developed. Your identity as someone who runs is still intact. Missing 1 week does not erase 52 weeks of work. It simply creates a gap in the sequence, and gaps in sequences can be closed. What you must never do is allow a small gap to become a permanent stop, because a permanent stop does erase the sequence and forces a genuine restart. The difference between a gap and a stop is the decision you make about which one it is. Make it a gap. Always make it a gap. Go back tomorrow. Go back now. Go back even if some time has passed. The path does not disappear while you are away from it. It waits. The compound interest of your previous effort waits. Your potential waits. All you have to do is return, and returning is always available to you. Third, and this is important, evaluate the environment you have created around your goals. Because one of the great hidden reasons people struggle with consistency is not a lack of character or commitment, it is the absence of structure. Structure is the scaffolding of consistency. When you build the right structure, when you automate, schedule, create accountability, remove friction from the behaviors you want, and add friction to the behaviors you want to avoid, you make consistency easier than inconsistency. And when consistency is the path of least resistance, you become consistent almost by default. This is not a cheat. This is sophisticated environmental design. The most successful people I have ever studied were also, without exception, excellent architects of their own environment. They arranged their circumstances to support their objectives. They were not leaving their success to willpower and hope. They were engineering it. Let me tell you something about the people who achieve financial independence that surprises most people when they first encounter it. They are not dramatically different from you in terms of their capacity for pain, their experience of doubt, their moments of temptation to quit. They feel all of it. The successful entrepreneur who built a $20 million business from nothing did not have a superpower that prevented them from feeling fear during the difficult years. They felt it. The investor who built a portfolio that generates passive income while they sleep did not have a mathematical genius that made the process obvious and painless. It was hard for them too. They simply made a decision early in the process about which pain they were willing to accept. They decided to accept the pain of discipline rather than the pain of regret. And once that decision was made clearly and finally, consistency became the only logical response. Because if you have decided to accept the pain of discipline, then every day you choose not to be disciplined is a day you are choosing pain without the corresponding reward. That is the worst of both worlds. The disciplined path, the consistent path, is actually the more comfortable choice once you have genuinely committed to accepting its temporary discomfort. Now let me talk about what consistency does to your identity over time, because this is perhaps the deepest dimension of what we are discussing today. When you are consistent in your financial behaviors, when you save regularly, invest regularly, learn regularly, work with focused effort regularly, you are not just accumulating money. You are accumulating an identity. You are building brick by brick the self-image of a person who keeps their word to themselves. And that self-image is the most powerful asset you will ever own. More powerful than any investment, more powerful than any skill.
Because your self-image determines your behavior, and your behavior, compounded over decades, determines your life.
When you consistently keep the promises you make to yourself, you develop what I would call integrity of identity. You become someone who can be counted on by others and, more importantly, by yourself. And when you can count on yourself, when your word to yourself means something real and binding, you begin to make bigger promises. You set bigger targets. You pursue bigger objectives because you have evidence, actual, lived, experiential evidence that you follow through. That evidence generates confidence, not the hollow confidence of someone who has never been tested, but the deep, grounded confidence of someone who has been tested repeatedly and has consistently chosen to keep going. That is the confidence of the millionaire. That is the confidence that makes other people trust you, invest in you, partner with you, believe in you. It radiates from within, and it is built entirely through the repetition of keeping your promises to yourself.
Here is a question I want you to sit with. What would your life look like if you had been 10% more consistent over the past 5 years? Just 10%. Not a revolution, not a complete reinvention of your habits. Just 10% more follow-through on the intentions you had. 10% more recovery speed when you fell off track. 10% more discipline in the small daily decisions about money and learning and effort. Where would you be right now? And I ask that not to produce guilt. Guilt is not a useful fuel, but to produce clarity. Because when you see clearly the gap between what consistent action would have produced and where you currently are, you also see clearly that the gap can be narrowed starting today. The past is information. The future is choice. And the choices available to you right now are exactly what they have always been. Consistency or inconsistency. Progress or stagnation. Compounding or decay.
Let us talk about wealth specifically now, because I want to be precise about what we mean when we say that consistency turns ordinary people into millionaires. Wealth does not accumulate in dramatic moments. Wealth accumulates in ordinary moments. It accumulates in the moment you decide not to spend money on something that does not serve your future, even though spending it would feel good right now. It accumulates in the moment you pick up a book about finance instead of turning on the television, even though the television is more immediately entertaining. It accumulates in the moment you make your monthly investment contribution, even though the market is uncertain and fear is whispering that you should wait. Every one of those moments is small. Every one of those moments is forgettable. And every one of those moments is a brick in the foundation of financial independence. The wealthy person does not have fewer temptations than the person who remains financially ordinary. They have not been spared the allure of immediate gratification. They have simply developed through consistent practice the ability to delay it. Delayed gratification is one of the most financially powerful skills a human being can cultivate. And it is cultivated exactly like every other skill, through consistent, deliberate practice. Every time you delay a purchase that does not serve your goals, you are practicing the skill of delayed gratification. Every time you invest rather than spend, you are strengthening that muscle. And over years and decades of that practice, the muscle becomes so strong that you barely feel the pull of immediate gratification at all. What once required tremendous willpower now requires almost none. The discipline has become identity. The behavior has become automatic. The wealthy life has become the natural expression of the person you have consistently chosen to become. I want to speak about the social dimension of this because no person is an island, and the people around you have enormous influence on whether your consistency holds. The people you spend time with, the people whose voices you hear most often, whose opinions you value most deeply, whose examples you follow. Those people are either assets or liabilities to your journey of consistent financial development. I am not suggesting you be cruel to anyone. I am not suggesting you abandon relationships carelessly, but I am absolutely suggesting that you examine who is in your close circle and what their consistent behavior looks like, because you become the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. That is not a metaphor. That is a documented pattern of human behavior. Your habits, your vocabulary, your ambitions, your standards, all of it migrates toward the mean of your social group. If your social group has low financial standards, low consistency, low expectation of what life can provide, their gravity will pull you down, not through malice. They love you, but love and influence are different things, and the influence of the people around you operates whether or not they intend to influence you. The person who wants to build wealth through consistent action must therefore deliberately seek out communities of people who are already doing what they want to do, not to impress them, not to network for advantage, but to absorb their norms. When you are regularly around people who invest consistently, saving money feels normal. When you are regularly around people who read and learn and develop themselves, reading and learning feels normal. When you are regularly around people who talk about building wealth rather than just spending it, your own orientation toward wealth begins to shift. The environment shapes the behavior, and the social environment is one of the most powerful environmental forces available to you. Here is something I find remarkable every time I think about it. The habits that produce millionaires are not complicated. They are not beyond the reach of ordinary people. They are not expensive to begin. You do not need a great sum of money to begin investing. You need a small sum applied consistently. You do not need a prestigious education to begin learning. You need a library card applied consistently. You do not need powerful connections to begin building relationships. You need genuine curiosity and consistent follow-through applied consistently. The raw materials of a wealthy life are not scarce. They are abundant and available to almost everyone. What is scarce, genuinely scarce, is the willingness to apply these abundant resources with consistent, unbroken, patient effort over an extended period of time. That is the true scarcity. And the person who provides that rarest of resources, the person who says, I will do the ordinary things extraordinarily consistently, that person becomes, over time, extraordinary. Not because they did extraordinary things, because they did ordinary things extraordinarily well. Let me tell you what I have observed about the internal experience of the consistently improving person at the point when the results become undeniable, because that moment arrives. After the years of invisible compounding, after the enrollment gap, after the social pressure to relax and be more like everyone else, the results begin to appear. And when they do, they appear not gradually, but suddenly. The tipping point of compounding is logarithmic, not linear. For a long time, the results are small and incremental and hard to see. And then, at some point that you often cannot pinpoint exactly, the results become large and obvious and hard to miss. The wealth begins to generate its own momentum. The learning begins to produce exponential opportunities. The network you built consistently over the years begins to surface possibilities that look to the outside observer like extraordinary luck. And inside, you know better. You know that this supposed luck is simply the accumulated interest on a decade of consistent deposits. You feel a particular kind of quiet satisfaction that is entirely different from the loud, short-lived excitement of a windfall. It is deeper than excitement. It is confirmation. It is the moment when the internal knowing that the process was working is confirmed by external reality, and the gap between who you are on the inside and what your life looks like on the outside finally closes. That closing of the gap is worth every difficult morning, every evening when you chose reading over entertainment, every month when you chose investment over consumption, every moment of doubt you pushed through, every conversation where you defended your discipline against people who thought you were working too hard. All of it was worth it, not just for the money, though the money is real and it matters and I will never pretend it does not matter, but for the person you became in the process. Because the truth about the journey of consistent financial development is that it does not just build a bank account. It builds a character. It builds a self. It builds the kind of person who can handle prosperity without losing perspective, who can navigate adversity without losing hope, who can look at the long arc of their life and recognize that it bent in the direction of their deliberate, consistent choices. I want to close with something that I believe with every part of me, something that I have seen prove true in my own life and in the lives of countless people I have had the privilege of knowing and speaking to and watching over the decades. The ordinary person who commits to consistent action, who makes the decision to do the small things faithfully, day after day, in service of a clear financial vision, does not remain ordinary. They cannot remain ordinary. It is literally mathematically impossible for them to remain ordinary because consistency applied over time produces compounding, and compounding transforms everything it touches. The caterpillar that is consistent in its process does not remain a caterpillar. The consistent river does not remain where it started. The consistently watered seed does not remain underground. Nature does not allow consistent application of growth principles to produce stagnation. It produces transformation always, without exception, every time. You are not the victim of your circumstances. You are the architect of your habits, and your habits are the architects of your circumstances. That sequence, you to habits to circumstances, is the most important chain of causation in your financial life. And the link that makes the chain strong or weak, the link that holds it all together or allows it to break, is consistency. Fortify that link, protect it, return to it when life tests it, trust it when results are invisible, honor it when doubt is loud, because on the other side of consistent effort, on the other side of years of faithful, daily deliberate action, is a life that reflects the best of what you are capable of. Not a lucky life, not a gifted life, a built life, a life constructed brick by brick from the ordinary materials of discipline, patience, and relentless consistency. The millionaire is not someone who happened to you. The millionaire is someone you become. one consistent day at a time. And you can begin that process today, not tomorrow, not when conditions are better, not when you feel more ready. Today, because today is the only day you ever have. Today is where the chain of your future is forged. And the person who understands that, who genuinely, deeply, practically understands that, does not need luck. They have something far more reliable. They have a process. They have the daily decision to show up, to grow, to invest, to learn, to continue. And continued faithfully, that process does not just produce millionaires. It produces extraordinary human beings. And extraordinary human beings, as a natural consequence of what they have become, attract and create extraordinary lives. Do not let another day pass on the outside of that understanding. Step inside it, make the decision, build the structure, begin the practice, and then above all else, above inspiration, above motivation, above strategy and tactics, and all the sophisticated frameworks the world will try to sell you. Above all of that, be consistent. Simply, powerfully, faithfully consistent. Because that, more than anything else I could tell you today, is how ordinary people turn themselves into millionaires. Not by being special, by being consistent. Now go and prove it with your life.